All right, well, hello everybody. Normally I'd say go Gators, but today I'm going to say go Turtles because I'm going to be talking to you about turtles. And to paraphrase the recently deceased, but great turtle man Peter Pritchard, he says that all kids love turtles and some of us just never outgrow that. And I definitely fall into that category. So even though I consider myself a vertebrate ecologist, turtles are they're my favorite. I should say I had them as kids, and I'm fortunate that I get to study turtles on occasion and talk about turtles in formal classes and settings like this. So I appreciate you guys' time to listen. So yeah, like Tim said, I'm with the University of Florida. I'm an extension specialist, and I also teach a variety of courses in the Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation on the UF main campus in Gainesville, and that's where I am today in my office. When I leave my office, I put on my frog mask. So frogs are also a favorite of mine. Some of you might realize from having attended some of my wife's presentations before, but we're going to talk about turtles today. All right, so there was I got emailed some questions from somebody that I'm sure is in the audience today, and so I wanted to address those first off. So one of those was, how can I safely move a turtle off the road? The issue was maybe getting bit. Well, first off, I want to point out that road mortality for turtles is a really big issue, and there was a study. Now it's probably 8 to 10 years old, but it actually showed. It was a review of other published studies, and it showed there was evidence that turtle populations, particularly in urbanized areas near roads, were experiencing skewed sex ratios with more males than females, and they likened that outcome to the fact that female turtles often get killed on roads when they come up to nest. Now, it's not only females that move to nest. Sometimes turtles will move if their wetlands drying up, or they just want to move from one place to another, but it's often females coming up to lay eggs. So it's good to move turtles off the road, but first and foremost, your safety is very important. So watch out for traffic, be very careful, particularly if you're on a busy road. I did actually almost get taken out by a car on a curve one time on a class trip when there was a box turtle crossing the road, and I ran back out of the class van, and I was not as careful as I should have been, but fortunately I made it out unscathed, as did the box turtles. So being careful when you're moving turtles so you don't get bitten. Most turtles are not going to bite you. They're going to be intimidated. If a car just zip by them, they're going to have their heads pulled in, and you won't even see much of the turtle except its shell, and you can easily just pick it up on either side of the shell. It's what is called the bridge. So that'd be like picking it up right here. I'm pretty sure you guys can see my pointer here. But some turtles, like soft shells and snapping turtles, do have a long neck, and they will occasionally bite. So you have to be careful with them. If you find a snapping turtle, you may be able to lift it up by the tail and get it off the road. Soft shells, on the other hand, are a little more difficult to handle. They don't have much of a tail to hang on to. They're flattened. And even if you go grabbing it by the back of the shell, which I have done before so you don't get bitten, they have big, very strongly webbed and clawed rear feet, and you can get scratched pretty substantially. So I would say with soft shells, just sort of scoot them off the road with your foot, and don't worry about dinging up the belly of that soft shell when you're doing it. Get it across the road. And then, what side of the road to release the turtle? That's a tough question. I usually sort of take the notion that if the turtle's going, if I can see it headed in one direction, that's where I'm gonna put it. Certainly, our terrestrial turtles, like gopher tortoises and box turtles, know their landscape. They know they're in their neighborhood. They know where they are. Other turtles might be females coming up to nest, but you might decide if it's given the conditions and the situation, which side to release the turtle on. So soft shells, again, they're kind of tough to handle, but you could just scoot them off with your foot. Also, the question was about seeing turtles getting fed at a local lake or a pond by people giving them popcorn. So is it good to feed wild turtles? I'm going to say as a blanket answer, no. Turtles can do just fine foraging on their own, and they should not be fed. I put this image in because there's so this is a dead soft shell turtle. You'll see that one later that was hit by a car. These are introduced or invasive red-eared sliders at the Wrights Union Pond here on the UF campus. And when you go up to that pond and look down, the turtles all gather around because students throw bread and other stuff in there to feed the turtles. But turtles in the wild aren't going to be feeding on those kind of things. So it's not good to feed wild turtles. So anyways, that's the answer to those 2 emailed questions I got, and we'll certainly have time for questions later. All right, so well, I'm going to talk about turtles in general, sort of set the stage, and then I'm going to give you an overview of a lot of Florida's turtles, and I'm going to take it by sort of a family by family approach to some degree, and then talk about at the end about threats to turtles, regulations, and give you some resources. This is if you're wondering what these are, this is along the Santa Fe River up here in Gainesville. Those are Swanee river cooters all up there basking. This is a turtle that's highly adapted to a riverine environment. So there's a bunch of animals up there getting their internal temperature heated up because they don't generate their own body temperature. They're quote unquote cold-blooded. They're ectothermic. All right. So turtles in general, all right. Turtles are very recognizable. They're recognizable in the fossil record. You just know a turtle when you see one because they have an extremely unique body plan for any vertebrate. They have an upper part of their shell that's referred to as the carapace, and then the lower shell referred to as the plastron, and most of them have a connection in the middle that we've often referred to as the bridge that connects the upper carapace and the lower carapace. And the carapace are formed of bones. There's bony elements, and the upper shell includes the ribs. So turtles are the only vertebrate animal that have both their pelvic and pectoral girdles inside their rib cage, because their ribs are really what are forming the bony elements of the carapace and the plastron. And in many turtle shells, it's easy to see the sort of the head of the rib coming out of their back. So basically, their ribs form their shell, and they contain, again, their pelvic and their pectoral girdles, so their shoulders and their legs inside their ribs, which is a very unique feature. That's just basically the scientific explanation of saying turtles live in a shell. They range in size from a few inches. We have a very small turtle called a bog turtle that's here in the U.S. to as long as 6 feet, and that would be the large, really giant leatherback sea turtle. Turtles, as a rule, this is the thing, turtles do not have teeth. They have a beak that is often referred to as a tomium, and turtles are well known for having slow growth, maturing late, and being very long-lived. And these life history traits, this slow growth, late to maturity, and long-lived nature of turtles can make them very susceptible to over-harvesting. Many turtles can't withstand, much harvest at a heightened level. It can cause them to decline or even could potentially lead to population distinctions. They feed on a variety of different food items, invertebrates to vertebrates, and also vegetation. Some turtles are completely herbivorous. Some of them are carnivorous. Some of them are omnivorous, and we find them globally in aquatic situations, so freshwater environments, in terrestrial situations, and we often think of those as tortoises. Some are semi-aquatic, and then we have a number of marine inhabiting turtles, sea turtles, and Florida has its share of sea turtles. I'll tell you about a couple of them. All right, from the standpoint of global turtle diversity in Florida too, there are 2 major groups of turtles, and you may not be aware of this. There's one lineage that are called cryptodires. These are what I call the hidden neck turtles. They pull their head into the shell sort of in a straight back and forth plane. And then we have a group called pleurodires, which are side neck turtles, that their head and neck fold into the side. They don't pull their head in and don't have their vertebral column. They're basically their neck inside the shell. It's folded along the side. And these hidden neck turtles, the cryptodires, occur pretty much everywhere except Australia, with one exception. We don't count the sea turtles in this, but there is a turtle called the pig-nosed turtle, or the scientific name is Careticales insculpta. That is a cryptodire that occurs in Australia. All the other Australian turtles are pleurodires. So side neck turtles occur in Australia, South America, and Africa. And if you know your biogeography and plate tectonics and history of continents and how they moved on Earth over millions of years, you'll recognize that Australia, South America, and Africa are part of what was the southern landmass called Gondwana that separated out from the northern landmass, Laurasia, many, many years ago. When I first started studying turtles as an undergraduate and a grad student at University of Central Florida, there weren't even quite 250 species of turtles recognized. Now globally, there are around 350. And the southeastern U.S. is a global center of turtle diversity. There should be a G in here. I'm not that much of a local yokel hick, ranking as the #2 hot spot in the world. So only in Southeast Asia is there more turtle diversity. So the Southeast, Florida is part of that, Alabama, Georgia. We are really, really important, and we're the most turtle-rich nation globally, and the lower 48 states with about 65 species of turtles. So very important global hotspot for turtle diversity in the southeastern U.S. for sure. In Florida, if you consider the marine turtles, the 5 species of marine turtles that either inhabit Florida's waters or nest on our beaches, we have more than any other state at around 30. If you see, it doesn't quite add up to 30, but that round number is easier to remember. So we have about 30 species of turtles. I think if you just consider freshwater turtles, Alabama might take the lead there, but we have a lot of turtle diversity in Florida. This is a loggerhead turtle from down in Melbourne Beach. I studied them some for part of one of my degrees. All right, so that's turtle diversity globally and in Florida. So now we're going to talk about Florida's turtles, and I'm going to have a bunch of slides, and they're all going to be set up largely the same with a few exceptions. We're going to have the common name of the turtle listed, its scientific name, some of the identifying characteristics of the turtles, the types of habitats where you'd find them, where you would find them in Florida, any other interesting information, and then I'll have some images over here to the side. So we're going to take it on a species by species approach, but we're going to do it by family. All right. So the first family is Calidridae. These are the snapping turtles. That is me a number of years ago in Rainbow Run with a very large common snapper that we found when we were doing surveys. I was helping out, my students and I were helping out a guy named Peter Malin, who was an instructor at Eckerd College at the time. And that's a pretty substantial snapping turtle there. That's the common snapper. So the 2 snapping turtles we have in Florida, really we have, I think, 3 species. The alligator snapping turtle not too long ago was divided up into 3 species by one of my grad students, as a matter of fact, based on genetics and on the morphology. But for all intents and purposes, you have the common snapping turtle as one, and then you have the alligator snappers, and the alligator snappers all sort of do things very similar, but they all have big heads with long tails and rows of large scales on them, roughed ridged shells, little tubercles or little projections on the neck. As you can see, a hooked beak, and this turtle is called a snapper. It can snap its head out of its shell very rapidly, and you don't want to get bitten by one. I was bitten by a small one time that I had as a pet, and it really hurt. Strong claws with webbed feet, but they're not exceptionally good swimmers. They're more bottom walkers. So a good fast swimming turtle would be like that Swanee cooter or soft shells. Also, they have a reduced plastron, as you can see here. This is the belly, the plastron. You can see there's a lot of skin visible. So in the snappers, they have a reduced plastron, and the thought here, and also they don't have a bony bridge connecting the plastron to their carapace. The thought here is that's an adaptation for their shell to be able to accommodate their large, extremely large heads. And if their shell was too rigid, they couldn't pull their head in. But they're fully aquatic, and well, I guess 4 species. So 3 of those alligator snappers, and then this common snapper. So first one is just the common snapping turtle, Calidra serpentina. Here's an animal that, in fact, I had moved off of a road, so you can't see me there, but I hold it up by the tail, and look at that big gaping mouth and that hook-shaped beak. Here's a picture of another one, and there's me holding that same animal. So it has those snapper characteristics that I just mentioned. I also mentioned it's got a long neck that it can just shoot out very rapidly, and when it feeds, it snaps that neck out, and you can see it will keep its mouth closed initially when it's striking. It'll lower the bottom of the mouth there's a set of bones in there called the hyoid apparatus, and they're attached to muscles, and it drops that down and forms negative pressure. And when it's snapping out and opening its mouth wide, it sucks in whatever food item it's trying to get, fish or tadpoles or maybe even a little turtle. But also you want to note here, the eyes are placed relatively dorsally, are high on the head. They're not really that on the side, and you'll see why I'm talking about this in a minute. And as this guy grows, now a little young snapping turtle is very bumpy and very ridged, but as they grow, these ridges become less prominent as they get bigger. All right. So this turtle, even though you can find it in streams and rivers, like this came from Rainbow Run, primarily it likes small ponds and lakes, small or big lakes, borrow pits, places like that that are soft bottom, and that occurs throughout the state except in the Keys. And it can, CL refers to carapace length, so that's the length of the shell from the front to the back. So if you see CL again, it says carapace length is 17 inches, so that's a pretty decent sized turtle. And as I mentioned, it walks on the bottom. They're not extremely strong swimmers. And has a rapid strike, and they commonly move over land for sometimes nesting, other times just moving around. All right, again, that's how both of these turtles I encountered, they were crossing roads. Threats to them, like a lot of other turtles, habitat loss and fragmentation by roads. And in the past, these guys were taken for food, but now harvest and possession of pretty much most of Florida's turtles are prohibited. So we've cracked down on the laws. Now, this next one is the alligator snapper. All right. Now there's 3 species, as I mentioned. This one is Macrokelys swaniensis. All right. This is the one that's known for having that little lure, little worm-shaped lure on the bottom of the mouth that it uses, particularly when it's young, opens its mouth and it wiggles that lure to attract small fish and other animals for food. Note, here is the eye on this animal, right there. That puny little thing is the eye. The eyes are very much laterally placed on the side of the head, unlike the common snapper that are more dorsally placed. All right. Also, you can't see it in either of these images, but they have an extra pair of scutes, and the scutes are just those scales that are on their back and on their belly. They have a pair of what are called inframarginal scutes, anywhere from 2 to 4 on each side of a shell, which is really a way to tell them diagnostically from the common snapper, but it's the placement of those eyes as well. Also, this is a riverine inhabiting turtle. It only occurs in rivers and their associated floodplain swamps. It's only in North Florida and the Panhandle. It is not in Central or South Florida. This turtle also rarely moves over land. It's going to be an extremely rare event for you ever to find an alligator snapping turtle crossing a road or even out of the water. Females will come out to nest, but they'll come out to nest on exposed sandbanks in the rivers in which they live. So if you see a snapping turtle crossing the road, it is not an alligator snapping turtle, almost 100%. It's going to be the common snapper that I just showed you, all right? This is the largest freshwater turtle in North America, one of the largest in the world, as a matter of fact, and they can get over 30 inches long and in excess of 200, some records showing they maybe even get up to 300 pounds. Again, largest turtle in North America. This is a buddy of mine, John Jensen. He's sort of sitting back from this turtle to make it look a little bigger than it is. And these guys, this species, they're sexually dimorphic. Males get much bigger than females. So this is that long, thick tail would indicate this is a male. And as I said, they nest on sandy beaches in the spring and early summer months. Threats to them include harvest and in the past, and bush hooks, which is just a heavy line with a hook baited that people would go to catch them. They've really declined a lot throughout their range in the southeastern U.S. They used to be used in Campbell's soup and Campbell's turtle soup, but they are no longer allowed to be possessed or harvested in Florida. You can't have them without a permit. So they're protected now, and hopefully it will slowly allow their numbers to recover. So those are our 2 snapping turtles. Again, the common snapper that you'll see crossing the road, the alligator snapper, which you'll probably never see unless you go snorkeling in a river or go to a zoo or somewhere, or you know someone who's studying them. And then we move on to the most diverse group of turtles, the family Amididae. These are the pond, or the sometimes known as basking turtles. These are ones that you probably are very familiar with that occur in lakes and rivers. You'll see them if you're canoeing or spending time on lakes. They come up to logs to bask. They have domed, relatively smooth upper shells, often marked with a bunch of light-colored lines on their shell and their skin. Often are boldly striped. So They have a fully formed carapace and plastron and a well-developed bridge, but they lack some of the features of these other families, as you'll see. Most of these guys are aquatic or semi-aquatic, and we have about 10 species of these pond turtles that are native to Florida. So one that you're probably not too familiar with because you don't encounter them that often is called the chicken turtle, Dibrachelles reticularia. That reticularia, the reticulate part, comes from the fact that it has this chain-like pattern that hopefully you can see on your screen, but this chain-like pattern of lighter spots on the back, all right? This turtle is shaped like an egg, wider in the back, more narrow in the front. It has what my professor at UCF, Dr. Lee Earhart, used to refer to as jailbird pants if you look at its rump. So that's the rump of the turtle. And then it's got a broad yellow band on its front legs. This turtle also has a long neck and has the ability to extend its head out and snap to take food. It likes little small, slow-moving or totally stagnant, non-moving bodies of water. It's not a turtle that you're going to see in lakes and rivers or streams. And usually when I see them, it's either crossing the road or it's a little small isolated wetland that I'm sampling for amphibians. Some unique things that occur throughout the state, some unique things about them. There was a study done in South Carolina that showed they would come up in the winter and spend their winter on land outside of the water. And they also will readily leave their a small wetland if it's drying out. I mentioned their long neck and also like the common snapper with that gape and suck feeding. And again, like you see repeated over and over, road mortality and habitat loss are major threats to this turtle. So that's the chicken turtle, Dibrachelles reticularia. Really a very cute turtle. I have had a couple of those as a kid as pets. And then we have Barber's map turtle, which only occurs in the Panhandle and the Apalachicola and Choctawhatchee river drainages and their tributaries only. And this is a really neat group of turtles. This is one of a number of species that occur in the southern U.S. of map turtles. They're called map turtles because on their shell, the light markings that's not too visible on these often resembles a road map. All right. There's sometimes, in general, map turtles are called sawbacks because they, particularly when they're young, and some species have very pronounced ridge on their back. Now, what you see in this upper image, you might think, oh, there's an adult and there's a juvenile. You would be wrong if you thought that. This is an example of extreme sexual size dimorphism. That is a female and that is a male. Don't ask me how they get together to make baby Barber's maps turtles. I'm not sure, but clearly it's a delicate endeavor. The female in this species is macrocephalic, which means she has a very large head, and her head is almost as big as that male. And the thought here is that it allows them to partition their habitat, which they're riverine species, as I mentioned, only rivers only. And the males will feed on smaller, soft-bodied invertebrates, where the females could feed on hard-body invertebrates such as clams and snails, things like that. And these turtles are often seen basking on logs. And threats to them, collection for the pet trade, they were very popular in the pet trade. I remember I coveted a map turtle when I finally got one. And then in some places, there's this reprehensible sport. It's not a sport, it's just a bunch of idiots drinking beer, running around on the river, plinking or shooting at turtles basking, which is just, it's sad, but people do dumb things, as we all know. And also predation by mammals, raccoons. Raccoons are predators and foxes too of freshwater and sea turtle nests. So that's a natural form of predation, unless we have augmented, in which many cases we have augmented our mammal predator populations through habitat modification and providing food sources for them. When you have increased numbers of raccoons, they can have big impacts on turtles. Then the next one, we have the diamondback terrapin, Malaclemys terrapin. This is unique because this is the turtle, our only turtle that's not a sea turtle, that occurs in salt water. So you find them in tidal creeks, salt marshes, and estuaries and mangrove swamps throughout the entire state, from all the way from Jacksonville all the way around to the, down in around the Keys, South Florida, up all the way over to the border with Alabama. But this is an estuarine turtle. Very easy to identify, gray skin with these dark flecks, and then ridge, usually bumps on the back, sort of a keel, and then concentric growth rings. So this turtle, the scutes, these are the scutes. When I mentioned that term earlier, these scales or patterns on the back. And in many turtles, as the turtle grows, those scutes flake off. Well, this turtle, they build up on each other, so you get these concentric rings. So 7 subspecies, 5 that are recognized in Florida. This has changed. There's been some recent molecular work to show there aren't that many, but I should update that. Neat turtle, again, mainly because they are in these estuaries, and they were also harvested for soup and Campbell soup in the past and severely depleted. Big threats now are collection for the pet trade, because a really beautiful map turtle can command hundreds or thousands of dollars on the pet market, and also drowning in crab traps. Because they're estuarine, they go into the trap to get the bait that's put in there, and then they're unable to find their way out. And so crab traps are an issue. And I've had 2 different students work on this species, this diamondback terrapin, Malaclemys terrapin. So a really unique turtle. So if you're out canoeing Indian River Lagoon or somewhere in a coastal area, look for these light color white heads popping up, and you'd be really fortunate if you see one of them, because in many places they're not very abundant at all. But that's a really unique one, the diamondback terrapin. And then one of our terrestrial, at least semi-terrestrial turtles, the eastern box turtle, Terrapini carolina. We also have, I'll show you in a second, we got one that's called the Florida box turtle. So they look a lot alike, but the Florida box turtle has thinner markings generally, and 3 toes on the rear feet, where this guy has 4 toes on its rear feet. But as the name implies, they are like a box. So they don't have a bony connection between the plastron and the carapace. And if you find a box turtle shell, frequently all you would find, if the turtle, is deceased and the shell is just laying out there as a bone, you'll just find that upper part. And so once the turtle gets really old, the bones in that front plastral lobe, so that's where the head is contained in there, and the rear plastral lobe, they fuse together, and then that upper shell fuses together like to form a bony helmet. So if it's a real old turtle that passes away, you could get just these 3 pieces of bone that you might find. This is an animal that was out in the Panhandle at Torreya State Park, where I took the photograph of it. But yellow dashes and lines on the shell, and then all you gotta do is pick it up and see that it's got this hinge, and then it can close up. They're also sexually dimorphic, meaning the males look different than the females. And in a male, the plastron here is concave, and that is thought so when the male mounts the female from the back, that her shell fits in there and keeps him from slipping off of her. So these guys like more wooded areas, places that are relatively high humidity and moist, and they'll frequently soak in shallow bodies of water. They are thought to live to be really old, and there's some reports of wild box turtles in excess of 100 years. But in reality, most of them don't get that old. And there's a really well-studied population of them out on Egmont Key in Tampa Bay that my PhD supervisor, a guy named Ken Dodd, studied for many years. So that's the eastern box turtle. As I mentioned, we also have one called the Florida box turtle, where this guy you can see is in the Panhandle. Come on, here we go. I'm having trouble with mine. I've got a new mouse I'm trying to navigate here. Where the Florida box turtle occurs statewide, and it's very similar things, and it's a really neat turtle. See, I don't see as much as them as I used to, but it's also very distinctive and easy to identify. And here, if I was to poll you, I'd say, is that a male or female? Everybody, of course, would say, I see that concave plastron, so that's obviously a male, and you'd be right. So that's Terrapini boweri. And then we have the Swanee cooter. I mentioned this one before, Pseudomys swaniensis. It's got a dark carapace. Now here is where that's dried algae all over the turtle, and there you can see where part of that scute would have flaked off. When it flaked off, the algae would have flaked off with it. Little tough to see, but they have a backward shaped C mark on them. And then if you look at their belly, this is a Swanee cooter. It's sort of a sort of a Rorschach test, you know, an ink blot test. They have these dark smudges that follow the seams of the scutes on the belly or the plastron. And sometimes you can only see this front lobe of the plastron, and it looks like a pair of rabbit ears. So if you're seeing a turtle basking and you see it's got sort of a yellowish orange plastron, you can see those marks, then you know, hey, I think that's the Swanee cooter. It is a riverine species, West Central Florida, really down as far as Tampa, and then up in the Big Bend region of Florida, and in the Panhandle east of the Apalachicola River. And as I showed you before, those turtles frequently bask on logs. And if you want to see them, come up to Gainesville and canoe in the Santa Fe River upstream from High Springs up towards the River Rise, and you'll likely to see lots of these turtles basking on logs. They're fully aquatic. You can see there's their nesting season. And this turtle, as well as one I'll show you in a minute, constructs a 3-chambered nest. So it digs a main nest hole, and then it digs 2 little satellite holes and puts eggs in each of them. And it's thought that maybe those satellite holes might have evolved as a mechanism to try to confuse mammalian predators that dig up and they find one of those satellite eggs and think they've gotten all the eggs and move on. Now this turtle, it used to be harvested a lot. Now it's no longer, you're no longer able to take or possess. You can't have them anymore without a permit from the state. And then we have one that looks very similar, but this is more of a lake-dwelling one, whereas the Swanee cooter was only in lakes, or excuse me, only in rivers. This one, the peninsula cooter, Pseudemys peninsularis, is found in lakes as well as rivers, but lakes are the common places to see them. So a darker carapace, sort of olive green, with a lot of markings on it. You can see right there, this one doesn't have a C shape on it. And then the plastron is just immaculate, sort of yellow creamy color. It doesn't have any markings on it at all. And then if you look at one of these this species, when they stick out their head, they have this loop, or sort of the shape of an old-timey hairpin that is on the turtle's head. This is a really common turtle. It's not that uncommon for me to get emails from people seeing them up nesting. They'll be, in large lakes that are in urban areas surrounded by homes. They do quite well there. And they also construct that 3-chambered nest. And you now no longer are able to take or possess these, even though the populations, as far as we know, are doing really well, because they look a lot like those Swanee cooters. So they're all sort of protected now. And this turtle has a bimodal nesting season. It nests in the spring, and it nests again later in the fall. And it's not uncommon when females are up nesting, even in natural areas, they obviously, if they're in a big natural area, they don't have to worry about road mortality so much, but raccoons will come up and sometimes attack them. And I found many of the shells of these peninsular cooters out at a piece of property here at the university owns that were raccoon predated. And otters are also major predators on turtles and lakes and rivers in Florida. So that's the peninsula cooter, Pseudemys peninsularis. And then another one, which back here, so that is a peninsular cooter. That's a Swanee cooter. And then this is the turtle I'll show you next. That's the Florida red-bellied cooter. This is an older male that has gotten these darker spots, so he's become what we call melanistic, or the melanin or dark pigment has formed. But here is now a red-bellied cooter, Pseudemys nelsoni. Very much shaped like those other turtles, except this one has a reddish bar on the scoot. So you can see that's one of the marginal or costal scoots here. You can see that red bar. Also, if you would see this turtle up close, you would see it's got this is its beak, or its tomium. You can see it's got this notch right there and these 2 little cusps. Also, the shell I mentioned, domed and rugose. You can see that rugose or rough nature here. If you pick up one of the shells of this turtle, if it's just the shell, the animal has deceased, and you pick up the same size shell of either the Swanee cooter or the peninsular cooter, you will notice the red-bellied cooter shell is substantially heavier. And they also have the bridge here the bones go pretty far in to sort of buttress it, if you will, and make it resistant to the compressive forces of the American alligator. Because this species, the Florida red-bellied cooter, is well known for laying its eggs in the nests of alligators. And if you think about it, if you can get in there as a female turtle, lay your eggs and get out without getting eaten by the alligator, you've got a great surrogate protector for your eggs, and you don't have to worry about raccoons coming in and getting them. So this is an American alligator out at Paynes Prairie. That is the head of a red-bellied turtle that I don't know what's going through its mind, but if it's able to freak out, it probably is at this point. But it's not uncommon for me to find the shells or find these turtles and find nicks and scrapes where they have been tried to be crushed by alligators, which have very strong jaws, extremely strong, but they live to tell about it. So they've evolved this really heavy and strong shell because they interact closely with alligators. And so lakes, ponds, marshes, sometimes in rivers, but they like more still water with abundant vegetation. And usually they're not a really big component of basking turtles on logs and rivers. Here's just some more information about their clutch size. So 14 eggs or so and multiple clutches. Many turtles will lay more than one clutch of eggs within a season. They're herbivorous like the other two, the Swanee cooter and the peninsular cooter. But there have been some papers to report that fire ants can be a threat to hatchlings of this species. Also happens in sea turtles sometimes. So that's Pseudemys nelsoni, the Florida red-bellied cooter. Now we move on to another family, the mud and musk turtles, and they are in the family Cynosternidae. And the way I tell my students to identify them is if you look at them, flip them over, and look at their plastron, particularly in genus Cynosternin. Here you can tell, because this is Cynosternin and this is Sternothrus, the scientific genera. The Cynosternin has a K right there. So that's one way I tell them. And there's a slight hinge here and a slight hinge there. So both of these, we have two species in Florida. Both of them have elongate shells. They're not really round. They're, again, more sort of egg-shaped. K on the plastron of the Cynosternin or the mud turtles. And then the musk turtles have a reduced plastron like we saw in the snappers with lots of exposed skin. Like the snapping turtles, these guys aren't exceptionally strong swimmers, and they're more bottom walkers. And we've got two mud turtles, a striped mud turtle, and then the common, and then we've got a loggerhead musk turtle, and then the common musk turtle in Florida. And they're called musk turtles because they will emit a musk that's stinksy. It's really foul smelling. Softshell turtles will do that too. So again, this new mouse, I apologize. It's very sensitive. So the first one, the striped mud turtle, Cynosternin boweri, and you can see in that upper image, it's got those three distinctive stripes. It's also got stripes on its head, as you can see with that image of me holding that animal underwater, and then it's got the plastron with the K on it. So a brown carapace with three light stripes and two light stripes on the side of the head. It likes lakes and small ponds and slow-moving streams. Don't often see it. I don't see it in big rivers or anything. And it's throughout Florida with the exception of the far western panhandle. Like many of our turtles, this one in particular, the females will come up and nest when it's raining. That's not exclusive to this. The Swanee cooters do it as well. And the thought is that the rain will pack down the soil and also can maybe help disperse scent from the turtle to try to help them remove scent that a mammalian predator would be able to cue in on. And this species has been documented moving hundreds of meters up into upland, so moving a long way from its pond to go nest. But not much are known about this, even though it's a very common turtle in Florida. We need more studies of them. So that's the striped mud turtle. And then the loggerhead musk turtle, this is a turtle that does inhabit springs and rivers. So also like in Rainbow Run, where we caught that snapper, we catch lots of these. So if you go snorkeling in Rainbow Run, you'll see these little guys all over the place. They're called loggerhead musk turtles because they have a big head like the loggerhead sea turtle. And strong biting forces. They eat small clams and snails. They have these blotches all over their skin. They're quite an attractive little turtle. They've got these little barbels on their chin, those whiskers to those, and that is a hatchling. So the hatchlings have this pink plastron when they're itty bitty, and so you can see that's a pretty small turtle, not even as big as a quarter. So not in South Florida, really, you know, down North Orlando and north is where you're going to find them. And they're, as I said in this group, they're bottom walkers, not exceptionally strong swimmers. I remember having one in an aquarium before as a pet, and it seemed struggling like I'll get out just to try to get from the bottom up to the surface to get some air. What else to say? The literature says 1 to 5, or excuse me, 2 to 3 clutches a year in clutch size from 1 to 5 eggs. So they don't mean that many eggs. Their eggs are fairly large. And like turtles, like most other turtles, all turtles, their temperature, or their sex, excuse me, is determined by incubation temperature. So this is really well known in alligators and in turtles. So we refer to it as environmental sex determination or temperature dependent sex determination. And in this species, cool temperatures produces males, and the warmer temperatures tend to produce females. Let's see, what else to say? Intermediate temperatures, males, and then again, the young guys, when they're small, they don't have this real strong beak. They are feeding on arthropods and more soft-bodied animals, but when they get larger and they have this really strong crushing beak, they're feeding more on mollusks, clams, and snails. But that's the loggerhead musk turtle, Sternotheris minor. Now we move on to the tortoises. So we have one tortoise in Florida, the gopher tortoise. So these features describe the gopher tortoise. So a rectangular brown shell, like the turtle I showed you earlier, the estuarine Malaclemys terrapin, the diamondback terrapin. Tortoises usually develop scute annuli. The scutes just build up on each other. Unless it's an old turtle that's scraped, you know, going in and out of its burrow, you can see the scute annuli, and some people use them as a rough indicator of age, sort of counting like the growth rings on a tree if you were to cut it. They have really broad, strong front legs with really strong claws that are very robust, that are adapted for digging, and they have club-like or elephant-like rear limbs. And they also have very defined, prominent scales on their legs, both the front and the rear. And this turtle, as you probably know, is a terrestrial burrower. It lives in a deep burrow, and this is our gopher tortoise. So there's some pictures of one. There's an adult in the top, and you can see those broad front digging paws and those strong claws and scales. Below that is a little young, very, very cute gopher tortoise that's very susceptible to predation because they don't have a well-developed bony shell yet, and they're very soft. And then at the bottom there is that tortoise burrow with its broad pile of sand that's often referred to as an apron. All right, and frequently the tortoises will nest in that apron. Now, because they dig burrows, they need to live in habitats that are dry and that have lots of deep sandy soil. So you find them in sandhill and scrub and drier areas. And it's not uncommon to find gopher tortoise burrows along sloping road shoulders, particularly in areas where you have what used to be really nice uplands, but because they've been fire suppressed, they've grown over and they're no longer open, and they don't have the herbaceous ground cover that the tortoise needs. So the tortoises end up moving to find open habitat, and that sort of forces them out onto the roadside. So of all of our turtles, this one is the most dependent on fire. So prescribed fire now is what we mainly do, is very, very important. And as I said, this guy digs a burrow. It can be in excess of 25 feet long. And one tortoise usually digs more than one burrow, and that the number of burrows that a tortoise has varies. So if you go out and count the number of active burrows, you know in most cases that's going to be less than the number of tortoises you have. So to estimate tortoise numbers, scientists stick a camera, basically a scope, down the burrow, and you figure out, all right, on this particular property, you know, you have one tortoise for every, 1.7 burrows or whatever it might be, and that varies from site to site. And tortoises, as you may know, are considered a keystone species. That's because there are a lot of animals spend time in the burrows of gopher tortoises. Upwards of over 350 species have been documented. Mainly those are invertebrates that inhabit them and live there. But we do know that there's a few species of vertebrates that do spend significant time in tortoise burrows, and these would be the gopher frog, the indigo snake, as well as occasionally eastern diamondback rattlesnakes. And as I've alluded to, fire suppression is a problem in this species, as well as habitat loss. And then I haven't seen it being considered as much of an issue lately, but they do get an upper respiratory tract disease that can cause declines of tortoises, and that complicates things when we're developing areas and having to move tortoises from one place to another. You don't want to move a diseased tortoise. So they're currently listed as threatened in the state, and you're not allowed to have them, so they're protected. And then we move on to the softshell turtles. They're in family Trionychidae, and we have 3 species in Florida, but there's one called the Florida softshell that is the most widespread, and that's the one you guys are going to see mainly. Well, you got to get out to the Panhandle and the rivers out there to see what's called the one of them is called the spiny softshell, but it's the Florida softshell that I'll talk the most about. But all of them have round, leathery shells. They don't have those scales or scutes on their shells that our other turtles do. And they also, interestingly enough, if you pulled all the scutes off of let's say a gopher tortoise shell, you would see that there's bones underneath that do not overlap with the scutes, and that's thought because it would give them greater strength. But the gopher tortoise and our other tortoises would have a ring of bones that basically form a circle around the outside of the carapace called the peripheral bones, and the soft shells do not have those. So if you find a soft shell turtle shell out in the woods and the soft shell turtle has died, you'll just see a sort of a shriveled up leathery edge and possibly the rib bones sticking out. They're also like a pancake. So they're dorso-ventrally flattened, they burrow in mud and sand, and they have a very long neck with a snorkel-like snout. They are exceptionally good swimmers, and they will bask often. I see them at a place here in Gainesville called Depot Park. I see soft shells basking out there all the time. And again, we have 3 species in Florida. The main one, though, is the Florida soft shell, Apollone ferox. So here is a juvenile animal. It's not a hatchling. When they hatch, they have very prominent little round circles all over them, but you can see the remnants of those, and that will fade over time. And then this long neck and that little snorkel of a snout. This animal is, I took this photograph over on the campus of Santa Fe Community College here in Gainesville. And even though the water is clear, really all that's exposed is this little tip of this turtle iceberg. It's 2 eyes and that little snorkel snout. And then the rest of the turtle is hidden underwater. And look at the size of that back foot. The front would be the same. They're wide, broad feet and very well webbed. These are strong swimmers. They're even difficult to swim down and catch when we're in Rainbow Run sampling for them. There was 1 or 2 students who got really good at this, but soft shells they're a bear to handle. They're tough to catch, and then they'll bite you, they'll scratch you. So they're best just left alone. They're a major generalist. They're going to find them in all types of bodies of water throughout the entire state, and they will move overland. They're also harvested for food in Florida. They're a very common species. They lay round, hard-shelled eggs. A lot of our turtles lay soft-shelled eggs, but the soft shell lays hard-shelled eggs, and they're round, as does the gopher tortoise. It lays hard-shelled eggs. And then big clutches, so 10 to 40 eggs, and then they're pretty much carnivorous, and they eat all kinds of different things. So they're a really, really cool turtle, I have to say. And then this is, I mentioned, another one that we have. We have the smooth soft shell, and we have the spiny soft shell. This one is only in rivers and oxbows of the Florida Panhandle, all right, rivers there, and also in North Florida in the St. Mary's River. It's called the spiny softshell because it has these little tubercles that run along the top of the shell. They become smoother in a larger individual, but this is a little young animal from the Apalachicola River, and they actually have a little spine. They have a little spiky tip with them. And then you have some sexual dimorphism here, that you have males and females looking different. So males with spots and females that are more modeled in how they look. But again, they're flat, and then you can see this very leathery shell that they have. Sexual dimorphism, in this case, males smaller than females. And then like all the soft shells, they like to bury themselves in sand or mud. And if they do that in shallow water, all they have to do is be able to stick that long neck out and stick up that little snorkel of a nose and grab a breath, and you don't even know that they're there. So people still will harvest these soft shells, but this one you cannot commercially harvest, which I believe you still can, the Florida soft shell. So those are the soft shell turtles. Come on. And then we move on to the sea turtles. First, what are the hard-shelled sea turtles? And this is to contrast them from the leatherback sea turtle. So the family Cheloniidae. And these are our loggerheads, our green turtles, which nest in Florida regularly. It also includes hawksbill turtles that don't really nest too much in Florida, but do inhabit Florida's waters, particularly around coral reefs, and also the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle, that is probably the most endangered sea turtle in the world, that nests only in a few spots in the Gulf of Mexico, and rarely, but occasionally they will nest in Florida. But these all share the same features of having round, smooth shells. They're all relatively large turtles. Kemp's Ridleys don't get that big, but their front limbs are modified as flippers, so they don't have toes, they're not webbed, and they cannot draw their head into their shell. They're fully marine, all right? All of our species are fully marine, although you will see them in estuaries as well. Like they'll come in inlets like Sebastian Inlet over on the East Coast, and you'll find them, all the species really, you can find them like the Indian River Lagoon and other estuaries. So first one, green turtle, or the green sea turtle, an animal, gosh, this new mouse, I do apologize. Come on. I'm hardly touching this thing, I swear. You guys are thinking I'm going crazy here. All right, not going to touch it. All right, so Colonia mitis is the name on the top. That's a juvenile that we captured when I used to work with UCF and Louis Earhart, and we put a tag on it, and we're just releasing it on the beach, and I took the chance to take a photo op. But even though we have turtles nesting in Florida, we have Florida as a very important developmental habitat, and our nearshore waters are important for young green turtles, for young Kemp's Ridleys, hawksbills, and even immature loggerhead turtles. So green turtles have a smooth, sometimes they have some barnacles, but generally a very smooth carapace or top of shell with radiating streaks of brown, yellow, and green, sort of a starburst pattern. And on their head, they have these large prefrontal, pair of large prefrontal scales, and some other, the costals are these scutes I'll show you, and I think I might be able to demonstrate that in a minute, but a way to tell, specific ways to tell them from loggerheads. And also their head is relatively small for the size of the turtles. So they're totally marine, and putting tags, satellite tags on green turtles, researchers have found that the adults for the Florida population spend a lot of their time around the Keys in Southwest Florida. So our green turtles spend much of their adult life in Florida, which is really good from a conservation standpoint, because that means we can protect them on Florida's beaches, and we can also protect them in Florida's waters, and we don't have to worry about them traveling around, you know, the Caribbean too much, going to somewhere else where they might be able to be legally harvested. Because if you're trying to conserve a species, whatever it be it a bird, be it a turtle, be it a fish, that spends its time in various jurisdictional areas, if you put in all the effort you want in your area where you protect it, but then if they're harvested and not regulated during other areas where they go during their life cycle, you're not going to be effective. And so that's something you have to take into account. That is important for a lot of sea turtles. This is the second to the loggerhead in terms of the abundance in Florida, and their numbers are increasing. I'll show you a slide in a minute, which is very exciting for me because I worked on this turtle for my master's degree. Get about 3 feet long, their shells, and they actually are named for the color of their fat, not their outer appearance, even though they do look green. But their fat, if they were butchered, would have a green color to the fat. And they nest mainly on our high energy beaches of the east coast of Florida. And I have underlined, use simultaneous gait inland. or on land. So this means that when they're crawling up the beach to find a nesting spot, they put their front flippers together both at the same time and move them forward, as well as the rear flippers. So they move all their limbs at once, and then they push. So they don't do an alternating right, left, right, left. And this allows us to be able to tell a green turtle crawl, which you can see it sort of has straight lines across here, from a loggerhead crawl, which would have alternating, more of a zigzag pattern to it. So they're totally herbivorous, seagrasses and algae, and threats like other sea turtles. Artificial lighting on beaches can disturb females and also can misorient the hatchlings and prevent them from finding the ocean. Also, coastal armoring, putting riprap and seawalls, and I think this is going to become more and more of an issue in Florida as sea level rises, and occasionally boat strikes. And we also know that ingestion of persistent marine debris, plastics, is a problem for this sea turtle and all sea turtles. Now here is the loggerhead turtle. Here, look at the gait. It's diagonal. So loggerheads crawl up the beach with a right, left gait, and they leave a different pattern to their crawl. Even though their nests are easy to tell apart, if the turtle didn't nest, you would be hard pressed to tell a loggerhead from a green turtle if they didn't have this difference in gait when they were on the beach climbing up. So these turtles are usually brown rather than greenish color, and they have 5 costal scutes on their shell, and they have 4 of these what are called prefrontal scales on their head. They also are very important. Florida's a very important nesting area for them, globally important, as a matter of fact. The most nesting loggerhead turtles in the Western Hemisphere happens in Florida, and most of that occurs on the eastern coast of Florida, in Volusia, Brevard, Indian River counties. So also we do have adults and large juveniles that are around Florida's waters. They're slightly smaller than the green turtle, but like I said, they really are densely nested on the East Coast. And I mentioned this alternating gait. They differ in green turtles with this big head. They have very strong jaws. They'll take hard-shelled mollusks, horseshoe crabs, other things like that. Their threats are similar to the green turtle, Coloniomyces, plus also drowning in shrimp trawls. In the past, that was a much bigger problem. Now there's these turtle excluder device, so-called turtle excluder devices, that allow a turtle to get pulled into a shrimp trawl and then shun it out without having to stay in that trawl bag too long, and it allows the shrimp to pass through and be captured. So that's the loggerhead sea turtle. So this is where I was mentioning these prefrontal scutes. So if you look at the green turtle over on the left, you can see it's got these 2 big scutes between its eyes, and I dare not even move my mouse to show you what I'm talking about. 2 large elongate scutes or scales between the eyes, where the loggerhead in that same place has 4 of them. So that's one way that you can tell them apart if you couldn't otherwise. And this is more feature in smaller turtles than the big ones. Now, this is some data I want to share with you that's been collected by the state of Florida since 1989. That's when I started working for UCF and Lou Earhart's group, who used to be a professor at the University of Central Florida. And so these Florida conducts surveys. There's some happen this morning on all of these beaches in Florida, where you have trained volunteers going out and surveying Florida's beaches, usually on ATVs or sometimes on foot, and counting nests every morning during the summer. And I started working at UCF in 1989, and in the very early 90s, I was studying green turtles for my master's degree. And you can see, if you look at there, 91, 92, those were the numbers of green turtle nests. There's just a few hundred green turtle nests in these core beaches that represent the vast majority of nesting for green turtles and loggerheads in the state. But what we've seen over time is that in recent years, the number of green turtles, even though they have an on-year, off-year type thing, so you have a big year, usually followed by a low year, that up and down pattern has been consistent with very few exceptions. And because the turtles just need time to gain up enough energy to make the breeding migration and breed again. But you can see there is a significant, statistically significant upswing in the number of green turtles that are nesting in Florida. So green turtles in Florida are a conservation success story. Often we're talking about declines of species. Here we're talking about the Florida population doing very well, whereas loggerheads over this same period are flat. There's really no significant trend one way or the other. But another thing that I want to point out, from a biological standpoint of monitoring populations of animals, you need to do it really over a long period of time. And you can see this is over a period of about 30 years, barely the amount of time for a hatchling turtle, a hatchling sea turtle on Melbourne Beach to grow up to maturity and come back and nest. So we're just talking 1 generation or less. And if you can see, if you just did it like, let's say you studied them here, you'd say, oh, they're increasing, oh, they declined, or loggerheads. During this period, wow, they're doing really bad. They've declined, and people were concerned about them. But now they've had an uptick again, and people were not exactly sure. It might be environmental conditions that are leading to this variation. But the upshot is loggerheads have remained stable, even though there's more nests in Florida every year, but the green turtle numbers have just gone gangbusters, particularly in the past 10 years. So I wish I could find an investment account to get my money to do something like that. I think any investment account I might have now is going significantly downward. Let's hope that changes. Anyway, so there's some good information or good news on numbers of green turtles in Florida. So that excites me. Back from my day where I could go out and I could see every green turtle on a section of Melbourne Beach in one night. There's no way I could do that now on an up year. All right, and we're getting close to wrapping up here. Then we have another family, even though it's a sea turtle, it's so unique. This turtle is so unique, it's even in its own family, Dermocolidae. And this is the leatherback sea turtle. This is a very distinctive turtle, as you'll see if you're not familiar with what they look like. I'll show you. They have ridges on their back, many light splotches. They can get to 6 feet long, and there have been animals recorded up to weighing up to 2,000 pounds, so a ton. And the reason they're called leatherbacks is they don't have a hard bony shell. Their shell is a mosaic of much smaller bones embedded in tough tissue, sort of like if you would imagine a jigsaw puzzle of bones. They're also a very oily turtle if they were to be cut open, and their throat is lined with spines. This is thought to be an adaptation for the soft-bodied organisms, mainly jellyfish and their relatives that these animals feed on. So it's hard to believe that they can get enough nutrition from feeding on jelly animals, but they apparently can. And like the other ones, they can't withdraw their head in their shell. That's a sea turtle thing. And then there's only one, the leatherback. And they're extremely pelagic, as I'll show you in a slide towards the very end. All right, so here is a photograph in the upper right of a leatherback turtle that happened to still be out. She was a late nester, come up really early in the wee hours before daylight and found herself on the beach as the sun came up. Below that is a picture of a hatchling that you can see those extremely long front flippers, and you can see the ridges on both the hatchling and the adult. So there's no way to misidentify a leatherback. And their crawl is so wide, it literally looks like a tractor has come up on the beach and moved around and made a track on the beach. So no scoots, as I mentioned. They're like sort of like a soft shell turtle in that way, and big. So even though 6 feet is generally the size, I think this is the record one that called the Harlech one that was 8 feet and weighed 2,000 pounds. That's massive. And most of the nesting of this animal in the U.S. is in southeastern Florida, and their numbers have increased over the past 2 decades. And we're not talking like the green turtles. We're talking dozens or hundreds of nests compared to just a few 20, 30 years ago. But they seem to be doing well here, when in other places around the world, they're not doing very well. As I mentioned, pelagic. These are high seas travelers, and they dive to great depths, in excess of 1,000 meters. Scientists have put tags and sensors on them to determine this. And this is an impressive turtle. It's an impressive animal, all right? And I think I'll show you this slide here. So this is tracks of sea turtles. Dan Evans did a lot of this tracking. He was a grad student doing his PhD here at the University of Florida. And you can see all the turtles were tagged. I want to say that somewhere in Costa Rica, but in Central America, satellite tags were put on leatherback turtles, on nesting females. And then they sent back data. And look how far these turtles traveled. A number of them moved up into the Gulf of Mexico and spent time there. Other ones up into the North Atlantic. Look at this track. This turtle actually crosses the whole Atlantic basin and goes around off the coast of Africa, loops around before its track is lost. So this is just amazing. So this really underscores this concept of you can protect those turtles all you want on that beach if you're this country, but if then they are killed for food or drown in fishing gear in the Gulf of Mexico and not protected by the US or over here off this coast, then you're not going to be as successful in your conservation. So just a really, really incredible turtle, an incredible vertebrate. They even can maintain their body temperature above ambient. They're just really, really fabulous animals. All right, so really to wrap up, we also have some non-native turtles that are known to be breeding in Florida, excuse me. This includes the southern painted turtle, which is on that lower left. They were very popular in the pet trade, and they're known from a pond on the Florida International University campus in South Florida. We have the false map turtle there in the middle. At FIU and other records from other places in Florida, that animal in the middle actually was a photograph I took from in Lakeland at a place called Lake Morton. Also, yellow belly slider, which is native to North Florida. I didn't go over this species in my talk, but they've been introduced in that FIU campus. And then Pacific giant musk turtle down on the property of Zoo Miami would probably escape from the zoo. And then, of course, red-eared sliders are all over the place. But the main pathway for these turtles has all been the pet trade. They've bought them for the pet trade. So they're established in breeding here in Florida. This one is the one that's most common. Here again is that image I showed you earlier. This is the red-eared slider. Even though it's native to the U.S., the eastern half of the U.S., it's not native to Florida, and it was very popular in the pet trade. You could go in and buy for 50 cents, as many of those little things, the little turtles about the size of a quarter or a 50-cent piece as you could take them in your pockets if you were a little kid. But they look like some of those other turtles I showed you, the basking turtles, but they have usually a very distinctive red mark or red eater, it's called right here. And you can see here's a male red-eared slider courting the female. This one, as well as those other ones in the genus Pseudomys, like the red-bellied cooter and the Swanee cooter, the males have long claws, and they go up in their courtship. They tickle the female's face with their claws to try to entice them for breeding. So, long claws are in the males here, opposite from, it seems like, some of the individuals of our own species. But yeah, pet trade is common, been introduced all around the world, really. And they're now, you have to have a permit from FWC to have one of these as a pet. Oops, sorry about my phone ringing there. And then finally, I'll wrap up with threats and things to turtles in Florida. So I already mentioned habitat loss and fragmentation being a real big issue. This is not just for turtles, it's pretty much for all of our animals. And so you get direct loss of habitat. This is a problem, obviously, particularly if you're something like a gopher tortoise. And then you get mortality on the roads, because with habitat loss comes habitat fragmentation, and habitats are usually fragmented by the installation of roads, and roads are not good for turtles. Also, there still is illegal harvesting. People still occasionally will pull tortoises from their burrows. Poachers would put a strong hook on the end of a long pole, stick it down in a tortoise burrow, hook the tortoise by the back of the shell, and literally just yank it out, which is that has to be an extremely challenging task, because tortoises are very strong and they can just lock their claws into the side of their burrow. But that happens occasionally. Also, I mentioned bush hooks with the snapping turtles, and then collecting for the pet trade. And then for sea turtles, coastal armoring and light pollution are still pervasive threats that we need to be concerned about. Regulations in Florida now, as far as I know, you can't legally sell wild-caught Florida turtles. You can, some of them have in your possession, some of them you cannot have in your possession at all. And there's 3 of these species and some of similar appearance that are listed, and this has only gone into place within the past 5 years. And then there's also daily taken possession limits for others. Gopher tortoise burrows are protected, as well as the tortoise. Again, you cannot harvest the tortoise, you can't possess a tortoise, and there's rules in place that they have to be relocated before a site is developed. But finding places to put them can be difficult. And then sea turtles are protected by federal laws. They're still listed under the Endangered Species Act. All right, so if you want to know a little bit more about turtles, and I've covered today, and I'm almost done, you can go to the FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission website. This Turtle Survival Alliance is a great group committed to turtle conservation and stopping extinctions of turtles and tortoises globally. You might be interested in the Gophers Tortoise Council. Also, the Sea Turtle Conservancy used to be the Caribbean Conservation Corporation, stationed here in Gainesville. They do a lot with sea turtles. And then Partners in Amphibian Reptile Conservation is another good source of information, as well as the Florida Museum of Natural History's website when it comes to turtle ID. And at some point within the next 2 or 3 years, I plan to put out a turtle ID deck. So hopefully that will be available.